I've been talking about Larian Studios a lot recently because it really can't be emphasized enough that a lot of the narratives surrounding this game are completely and utterly false. I've talked a lot about how Baldur's Gate 3 isn't all that good and how everyone overhyped it and how it's mostly popular with wokesters and game journals who don't really play games anyway. Right. Baldur's Gate 3 was a complete and utter failure. And it's interesting kind of seeing the reality of the sales numbers finally start coming out. The fact that it was outperformed by Tears of the Kingdom, that there were several other Nintendo games that did about as well as it. And I think most interestingly, people are outright cagey about the actual culture and nature of Larian Studios, right? Because when you actually look at like how game journals talk about them, they try doing this thing where like Larian's a great place to work. It's amazing. Swin respects his employees. Like they're not like other studios at all. They do all this stuff. Like first of all, like I've said this before, Nintendo handles treats their employees very well, right? It's one of the most desirable places to work in Japan right now. Iwata refused to fire anyone when he was asked to by the shareholders. There were, Nintendo doesn't do crunch, right? Solid 40-hour weeks, right? They're big on treating their employees well. They understand that that's how you get good, high quality products, right? Nintendo is just an exceptional video game company, and yet you don't really see the gaming journals talk about that. Instead, they'll create some narrative about Larian being better for some reason because like it suits their purposes, right? They'll try and convince you that Larian is some major success story in gaming, that it's some ideal studio, but that is privately owned by Swen Lonk, which is not actually true, right? He owns a stake in the company, 70%, but the other 30% belongs to Tencent Incorporated, the Chinese giant, the company that I believe is going to be the next major rival for Nintendo in the gaming wars. Now that Nintendo has won the console wars, right? Over the past several years, like the games that have been obsessively pushed against Nintendo Online, stuff like Genshin Impact and Baldur's Gate 3 and Black Myth Wukong, right? Lots of these major AAA games that have come out of nowhere, they are Tencent products. And the Chinese are willing to go to extreme lengths to pretend as if their products are somehow better than what Nintendo does. Again, they keep winning Game of the Year nominations. They're willing to pay cosplayers to show up at events. They're doing all this like really shady, underhanded stuff to create this illusion of huge popularity and success outside of China, but it's not really true, right? Just look at how quickly like Black Myth Wukong fell off in the Western world, right? Nobody talks about it. Nobody cares about it. Nobody plays that game. It's just a from slop game. But because it's game of the year season, Game Award season, we have to like pretend this game is like somehow some major contender. And they even went so far as to pretend to do this psyop campaign of gaslighting people into thinking that game journals hated this game because it was too based. Kind of like what they did with Stellar Blade, but Stellar Blade looks better than this. To be completely honest with you, like if I had to choose between the two like Souls clones, I would go with Stellar Blade. So yeah, the hype around Wukong made absolutely no sense. It was never anything that was going to go anywhere. To me, it was very obvious back when I first heard about the game from Angry Joe. If you know anything about Angry Joe, he only covers games if like the studios pay him to do it, right? And the fact that he was so adamant that like Black Myth Wukong was going to be one of the best games of the year when he saw the trailer back in 2020, it was fake to me. Like right off the bat, I knew something was off. I knew I knew he was being paid, and I knew this was going to be a problem in the future. And it does feel like we're at the point now where Tencent has enough control over the Western gaming sphere where we're seeing game journos, we're seeing personalities, we're seeing people in the space like desperately try and pretend that these games are somehow relevant or better than what Nintendo is doing. Right? We heard like over and over and over again about how like Genshin Impact supposedly made more money than Breath of the Wild. It was way more popular, but how exactly would you gauge something like that, right? There's outside of like initial core sales, there really is no way to tell like how many used copies of Zelda Breath of the Wild are on the aftermarket, how many people have played through the game, how many people enjoy, because it's probably a lot more than people expect, right? It's probably significantly more than we know of. And that's just Breath of the Wild. Like when you look at like older Nintendo stuff in general, like I can tell you from experience, like the older consoles, the retro stuff that people are playing the most are older games. And so people are becoming more familiar with Nintendo's entire backlog of games, whether it's on Super Nintendo or N64 or whatever else. Like Nintendo just has this very very strong relevancy with older people and older hardware. I really don't think that China's method of gaslighting people into thinking their games are the most successful and are these huge success stories is really going to hold up. Like, no, I don't believe Black Myth Wukong actually sold 20 million units, right? I don't believe it's that relevant. I don't believe this game that came out of nowhere sold almost as much as Elden Ring by being a carbon copy of it, right? Like, I just don't really see that as realistic, right? Especially when we have other situations of similar products like Baldur's Gate 3 initially being hyped up as selling way more than it actually did, right? This is a reoccurring pattern with them where we're told that these games are like these huge success stories and the biggest deals in gaming, but the reality is quite a bit different. And I do think like when it comes to these when it comes to these Tencent owned properties, we're going to see a lot more of this gaslighting going forward. It's honestly quite a bit worse than what Sony does because I think Sony is like held accountable when it comes to like their regulators and stuff like that. I don't think they have as much like ability to like to the fudge with the numbers as Tencent does. But they do it. They do. But Tencent is a lot more brazen about it, probably because it's a Chinese company and they don't have like the same kind of oversight. And they are a literal branch of the CCP. So like they seem to have a lot more like ability to unleash propaganda and just straight up make stuff up if they feel the need to do so. So I do think this is something that we really need to understand as gamers and really start seeing Tencent as the major threat that it is. Like we are seeing a company that is worse than PlayStation continue to gain relevancy in the online space because people are desperately trying to keep the narrative away from to keep positive discussion away from Nintendo. And that is something that we desperately need to address.